this is passing functions around like props. And really, that's kind of all there is to it. It sounds more complicated and mathy and heady than it actually is. Um, the broad idea is that if I have some kind of outer component and it has state in it, say is on is false. And then it also has a method that changes that state. So something like toggle is on. Cool. Now, where this gets wild is if I have an inner component that maybe has a button on it that says toggle, we can give, it's a different color, we can give this method to that component. We can pass it down as a prop so that it can change the state. What I think is kind of fucked up about this, and React is the only one of these frameworks that makes you do this, is they call this data down, actions up. This has never made any sense to me. It's really like data down, actions down. So where data down, actions up comes from is, I'll draw a little bit bigger, is the idea that if I have this outer component and it has inner components, if I need to get state from here to here, then that gets passed like so. And then if we needed to get, if we needed behaviors, if we needed something to change this, like that toggle button or whatever, it would bubble an event up. And then you could add an event listener for this, and then once you catch that, change the state, and then that data goes down. So it all just goes in a circle. That's the idea behind data down, actions up. And that's exactly what's happening in React, except I don't think that metaphor helps. Because we're passing state in. Actually, let me use the same colors. So that is giving that inner component the ability to change the state. And then we can also pass that state into components if we want to. So that's the big idea behind this like data down, actions up kind of thing. So before we go any further, I'm going to pause there, hit me with some questions. What's unclear about this?
I think for me, what's unclear is like when you are passing something, like or if you have like a prop,
Mm-hmm.
and then like passing it through, and then also like at what points if you're passing it through like multiple components,
Mm-hmm.
when do you call it or need to like call up the function?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you could totally do that. You can call it the same thing. You can change the name every time you pass it. In the React community, there's an idea that I don't all the way agree with, but it is really popular. So when we're passing it through a bunch of components, it's called prop drilling. And some companies will have style guides saying like, well, you shouldn't drill something down 3 times, more than 3 times, more than 4 times, something like that, because it gets hard to trace where something came from. I think that the logic behind that is sound, but I think there's some forest we're missing for the trees on that. So I don't put any arbitrary rules on that, but some React folks do. Um, I'm sorry, does that answer your question?
I think so. I guess I well the part about like it not needing to be the same word is
Yes.
makes it more clear because I didn't know if I needed. I know it's just like holding the place of like
Mm-hmm.
whatever the prop's gonna be, but I didn't know like if it needed to be the same or if it worked the same or what.
No, it's it's very literally just like parameters and arguments in functions. What you call it in your function definition absolutely does not need to be what you're calling it when you're passing it in to the function. And under the hood, that's all that's happening.
Okay, thank you.
More questions so far?
Can you explain more? Sorry. Can you explain more about the data down and action up, like
Yep.
in the picture?
Absolutely. So, in the traditional meaning of data down, actions up, you pass the data down through components as props. The actions up part in most other frameworks is this inner component emits an event. This outer component listens to the event and then also emits an event. It just keeps passing that event up. And so up here, I can listen for that event and go, oh, cool, so some button way down here got clicked, and now I can change this data, and that data gets passed down, and so it just goes in a circle.
Got it.
That same
Thank
thing is
you.
happening in React, but what makes it confusing is instead of listening for events bubbling up, you actually just pass the functions down so that the inner function here actually calls that function. We don't bubble up events in React components like we do in the DOM, for example. But that's where the metaphor comes from.
I still a little bit confused when you said we do not bubble up. Like,
Sure. So in React, you'll have event handlers like on click and things like that, but they don't go up any more than that. Like you can't listen to events from inner components like you would in DOM elements. So like if I have um, if these are just DOM elements and I click here, that goes up so that I also clicked on this. And if there was a component, or a DOM element around that, I also clicked on that. And so I can put event listeners on any of those. If you remember, that's how event delegation worked, where we're just putting the event listener on a higher level element. That's exactly the same way that it works in every other framework, where these inner components can emit events. React components don't emit events up. And so instead, what we do is we pass functions down.
Is it because it's like confined to its own component?
Yes, that's exactly what it is. Now, like a thing that I think will serve you well as just a rule that you can lock onto with this is wherever the state is, that's where you need to define the method that changes that state. So if our isOn state is here, the thing that changes that to true or false or whatever, that needs to be on the same component, always. Can't be anywhere else. But another component can still call that function, it just needs to be passed it as a prop.
yeah, I learned this from yesterday. Like, you cannot passing the component to if it's not a child. Like, I mean,
Yes.
like I try to passing through but it needs to be step by step. You cannot like,
Yes,
yeah.
absolutely. And so what you can kind of extrapolate from that is that if, let's say I have a component hierarchy that looks like that, if I'm using some state here and I need to change the state here, that means that both of those need to go up to the parent. Because the function that changes state needs to be in the same place as the state. And Alice, like you said, you can't pass it up and you can't pass it sideways. You can only pass these things down. And so you need to find some common parent that they have where you can put that then. Ask me more questions.
I have a question about you says cannot pass this up.
Correct.
But when we talk about hook,
Mm-hmm.
that is totally different thing, right?
Kind of. Hooks don't let you pass stuff up. There are no component frameworks where you can pass data up. So hooks give us a different syntax for things like set state. Hooks are a replacement for that, and lifecycle methods, and some of the things that we still use class components for. Hooks give us a way to do that same thing without classes. More questions?
So Kyle, just to clarify that question. So let's say there was some state in a that needed to be shared between components. Even if you're using hooks, you would still need to define that state in a higher parent component and
Correct.
trickle that down, even if they are functional components.
Correct. Yeah, only being able to pass things down, that's like a law of physics in components. It's the only direction you can do stuff.
And to add to that, you have to also bring props with it, correct?
Explain that.
So, like when you set your state in your initial top end of your hierarchy, then in order for you to get the state down to your lowest hierarchy, you have to pass props instead of state.
Well, so yes, let's be like careful about the vocabulary on that. So props is always just somebody else's state. So in this case, it's state here, it's props once it gets passed in. In this example, the state is here, gets passed in as props here, gets passed in as props here. So whether something is state or props is a matter of perspective.
Okay, so if state is just if props is just somebody else's state, when I get props to my final location, I have to also add functionality into props in order for it to understand which functionality I'm trying to address to props. I know that was poorly misworded.
So if I have state up here and I have a function that calls set state, it's in the same component, has to be. If some child component needs to use that state, the state up here becomes props in here. And then
correct.
I could also take this method that calls set state or whatever, I can also pass that in. I don't have to, but if this thing needs to change state or if the child component needs to change state, it can. And in both cases, that's props. because it's owned by this component and it's being passed into this inner one. It gets passed in as props.
Very well, thank you.
Cool. More questions?
I'm just kind of confused about the syntax of it, but we'll probably get there, huh?
Okay. More questions?
Yes.
Yes.
I just want to can you explain between the class and the hook? This use the right word, because like when we use the function, usually when we set the state, and then we can change with passing the pop down. And can you show it's between like a version of passing the pop down and when we use the hook, what is different?
So that's a different conversation. We can talk about it next week. But
Okay.
All hooks do is replace your lifecycle methods and like your set state calls.
Okay.
It's just a different syntax for that. And then since you're not using those anymore, you don't have to use classes.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, so let's do a little bit of React. So give me, what's the app that we're making? Give me a noun.
Football.
What was it?
Football.
Football. Love it. Okay, so what we're going to do is this football app is going to list teams. It's going to let you add teams, and it's going to let you update teams. And so we're going to try to use the same form component for adding and updating. So just like always, the very first thing I do is delete a bunch of stuff. I'm going to delete, keep that, delete this. Delete that. Going to delete all of this. Going to delete that and that. And delete that. And then I'm going to clean out this component. Give us a nice fresh start. Okay. Do we have a working React app? We have a working React app. So let's list out some football teams. So in this component, I'm going to make a list of some teams. And I should be able to see those in the app. Cool, there they are. Get rid of this styling. All right, neat. So now turn this functional component into a class component. Somebody talk me through it. Bing, bang, boom. We should be able to do this fast.
You're going to do the class.
Okay, what else?
And then extend and components.
What else?
And on line 3, you're going to put a comma and put the components in there.
Good. What else?
I believe you're going to take out the parenthesis on line 1. And also the class stateful need the render.
Needs a render. Beautiful. Very well done. Okay, so now this is a class component, but I didn't actually change anything, so this should still be exactly what it is.
Yep.
So now I'm going to move those teams into state. Cool. And they're still there. All right, we're reacting away. So next thing that we want to, let's actually loop through them though. So I'm going to say teams are this dot state dot teams map. I need to map through the array of objects and turn it into an array of JSX elements. Then I can make this dot teams. Cool. Something it doesn't like. Oop, I did it again. I did the same thing yesterday. Anybody see what it is?
You need to put a return line on.
There you go. Alright, there they are. So, oh, and it's mad at me because they don't have a key prop.
Hey, Kyle, can you explain the difference between returning outside of render and returning inside of render?
Yes. So functions have return values, classes don't. So you would never return anything just inside of a class, but you would absolutely do that inside of a function. So for functional components, that's the return value of the function is what we're rendering. Inside of a class, it's whatever comes out of this render method. But
Okay, so
then I just do that, and we're good.
So in your class, you're writing functions and then you're returning what should be rendered. And then in your render, you're returning the function.
Correct.
Sweet.
All right, so everybody's showing up now. Nobody's mad anymore. Love it. So now we need a form that adds a team. So I'll make a form. And it's going to have a name of team name. Not called name. And it's going to have a submit button. Cool. All right, so we have a form to add a team. So I want to control this form. How do I do that? What are the steps? Think about it to yourself for a sec. The steps for controlling this form. Josh C., do you have any ideas how I can start controlling this form?
I'm spacing a little bit.
Okay, somebody help Josh out.
I know they're going to get their values from the state.
Very good. So this is half of it, is we got to bind the value of it to state. So maybe that's something like, make a form key over here, and then a name key that's bound to whatever, doesn't matter. And then I can make the value of this equal to this dot state dot form dot name. Cool. And if I go over to my thing, hey, cool. So we're halfway there, bound. If I make an empty string, now it's an empty string. Okay, so it's half of it's bound. How do I update it? Because right now, oops, if I can type as much as I want, nothing's going into the input.
Why?
Ooh, why? Why isn't that updating? We should know this. We're halfway through controlling the form. What's the other half? If I have the value for this input hard bound to whatever this is, me typing in that input isn't changing that. I'm not updating state at all, so there's no state for that input to bind to. It hasn't changed. So what do I do?
You need to like change the state so whatever actual value you're putting in updates that.
There you go. Cool. How do I do that?
Good question.
Make a function to listen to it for that change.
There we go. I like it. So it needs some function that we can call onChange. So we can call this update form value, like that. And I can put update form value over here. And just to prove that we're in business, I'll pass in that event and log it. So when I type in that input, I should see this console log fire. Hey, there we go. Okay, so that's connected. Now the last thing that we need for this is it needs to do what?
Update the state.
Actually update the state. And I saw this in a couple code challenges I was reviewing. Hopefully we're not doing this anymore. Certainly not doing that. That's not going to work. Can't use this dot state equals anything. It's called this dot set state. And we want to set form name equal to probably something like event.target.value. So this completes the circle of life, and it rules us all. And now I can type into a controlled form. That's all we're doing there. It's a circle. We bind the state in. We listen for the change updates state. The state's reflected in the form. That's controlling a form. Cool. Before we componentize that form, what questions? Yep.
Can you explain it again how the control formers work?
So the value on this input is bound to state. So if I
Yes.
want the value of that input to ever change, I need to change state. So what I do is I listen for somebody trying to change the state of the form, and it calls this function. Whenever that function gets called, it sets the state.
Okay. Thank you.
What else?
If the form was its own component,
Mhm.
how would you pass the state then through the function?
So the good news.
Can I jump into that?
Yeah.
Okay, so on your input of the form, you would have to pass it down to that component, and then you can take props, and then through props, you can pass the state.
Yes. But check this out. If I have that form in its own component, then I probably don't need this to be owned by the app component anymore. I can just have the form control its own state. What we're going to need to do though is we still have this list of teams. That's probably still going to live in this app.js component. And so to add something to that, the function to actually add the team, that's still going to have to live here. And that's still going to need to get passed in to our form component. So we'll see that in a sec. But first, let's get it all working just right here. So just like we were doing the onChange, how do I make this form actually add the team?
Are you going to make the function for the on-chains?
Not on change, it's close. On what event?
One on the on submit.
Submit. So when this gets submitted, we want it to add team. Okay? So we make a function called add team. Prevent the default. And then there's a couple different ways we can do this. There's part of me that still really likes doing it the exact same way we did in Mod 3, where we do form data equals new form data event.target, and then using form data.get name, like all the exact same thing we did in Mod 3, and that works. You guys probably learned this from Damon this way, and this is probably a more React-y way to do it. But our new team is going to be this.state.form.name. Since we're already updating the state with that, we can make our new team that way. And then we just need to get this added to this list of teams. And so we can do something like this.setState teams. And I noticed this on a couple code challenges too. What we can't do is this.state.teams.push new team. That's how you'd expect that to work. Why can't I do that? Anybody know?
You can't directly mutate the state.
You can't directly mutate the state, and push mutates stuff. So the way we do that instead is use our old friend the spread operator, and then add our new team there. Works exactly the same, but doesn't cause a mutation. While we're at it, we can also do something like reset that form. should add a team. Let's see. And there they are. Oh, it's mad about the key because I didn't give an ID. Whatever. We're fine. Awesome. So this form works. Before I move on, questions about what I just did?
I have a question, if that's all right.
Yeah, hit me.
I can't quite tell. This is broken up, and this is not broken up in its own component yet, right? It's still an app.
Correct. We have only used one component this entire time.
Okay. My question is, isn't it kind of resource heavy to for every time that you like click a letter or backspace or whatever, it mutates state or changes state and then has to re-render everything because you're re-rendering as fast as someone types. You know, like that could be up to like 90 words, however per second or per minute or whatever. Is that not resource heavy? And my second question is, having it be its own component, does that lessen that effect?
That is a great question. And the answer to the first one is like, yeah, a little bit. But it's because in practice, your second question, like, does breaking this into its own component help? Yes, it does. Because right now, when I'm doing this, when I'm every single keystroke, it updates state and then it re-renders the entire fucking app. Yeah, that's a little expensive. But once this is its own component, and the thing that I'm updating is just this state and that component, the entire app doesn't re-render, just that part of it does. And that's not that bad. This is part of like why we use something like React instead of doing, because like having reactive state, that's not all that hard. You don't need a library for that. But things like keeping track of which parts of the app need to re-render and which ones don't, that's a very nice thing that we're getting for free. Cool, more questions?
Where would you use handle submit?
In as soon as we break this into a separate component.
Okay.
So let's do that. I'm going to call this teamform.js. I'm just going to copy this entire thing in and then delete the parts that aren't relevant. So I get that. That's teamform. Teamform doesn't need to keep track of all the teams, but it should keep track of like this form part. I probably don't also need this form thing there though. I don't need the list of teams. I do need to update the form value. That can't go there. And this should just be this. And that is that. Okay, cool. And that's that. All right, we're good to go. To rip it out of the other one, I'm going to take out this part. I'm going to keep that. I'm going to take that out. This has to stay. And then this entire thing is going to get replaced with our team form component. So if I import team form from team form, this should all still be there. Looking good. And if I say this is, oops, not updating. one change, this dot update form value. Oh, it's because I still got that. So if I make this Packers, oh, it's because we don't have the form handler in there yet. But there she blows. So we've componentized this, and now both components are a little bit easier to read now because we've helped focus them a little bit. This team form, all it's responsible for state-wise is keeping track of the state of the form. And it updates it this way. Cool, everything's good to go. We don't have a definition for add team yet. But if we go over here, now this is getting a little bit easier to read too. We've taken that entire form out, cleans up the app component a little bit. Who can tell me why I can't bring the add team function into that team form?
Because you need to pass in prof.
Yes, but why?
Because you want to be able to use on a team form. What is your question again?
It has to do with this. Why does this add team function, why does it have to stay in app.js? Why can't I put it into the team form directly?
Because the state is in here.
Because the state that I'm changing with that form is in here. I can't call this.setState and change the teams if I don't own the teams. Teams is owned up here. And I need that because I'm listing them here. What a conundrum we have. How do I fix it?
Pass the function down through props.
Hey, there we go. So if this team form, I'll call this submit handler is this dot add team. So now team form has my add team function as a prop, and it's calling it submit handler. In the app.js component, it's called add team. Inside this component, it's this.props.submit handler.
Mm-hmm.
Can you say that again?
In my app.js component, this function is called add team. When I'm passing it into the team form, I'm labeling it as submit handler. So over here, this.props.submit handler is that function. Yeah, it's pretty wild. So if I do this.props.submit handler, now I've got a function that's going to take in this submit method, or this submit event, and do all the things. Let's see if it works.
You can name it whatever you want, right? Submit handler can be anything.
Correct. Yep, could be absolutely anything. It's not like onClick. onClick is React magic. This is not. So, first thing that, and this is exactly the kind of thing that my way works better on. So this doesn't have the state of the form. Why? Why didn't that work?
Is it because you can't, there's no state on your lower level component?
Well, it can't see the state on the lower level component because that would be passing state up.
You got to pass the state down.
Well, what we have to do yet it takes in this form submission event. What we're really kind of expecting there is like add team. You'd expect the thing you'd pass that to be, I don't know, team. So let's do this.
Yeah.
And this is hopefully like connecting the dots with why we usually do this as 2 steps. So I could call this submit handler and have it take in the event and like grab the team out of state and all that kind of shit. But since it can't do this set state, this dot props dot submit handler, and we pass in the new team. And then have this call that one instead. Even though those are called the same thing, this dot submit handler is on the component. This dot props dot submit handler is the thing that I passed in. And now this one, instead of taking in the event, takes in a new team, and we can just do that. So let's walk through the flow on that one more time. The team form component is looking for something that it's going to call submit handler. You can call it whatever you want. So we pass it this add team function that takes in a team and adds it to the list of teams. Cool. Over here, when this form gets submitted, it calls a submit handler. This submit handler does all things related to the form. It's preventing the default submission. It's making the new team by like reading this thing out of state. I could also do that like set state to reset it here. Like this dot set state. Like that. And then I'm calling the submit handler that I got passed in. That's the thing that actually adds it to state in app with this new team. And now, oops, still didn't like it. Because of that. Hackers, and there they are.
Could you name those 2 different things?
Yep.
I mean, to like avoid confusion, because it kind of like looks like you're calling the same function inside of it.
It looks like it. So like we could
I
call
know
this
it's not.
internal submit handler, and then call this
Yeah.
one internal submit handler, and then we could call this one external submit handler, and then change it here. External submit handler, and this should all still work.
So you're kind of like you're breaking up the set state out of that function because it can't be done in the lower component.
Correct. Yeah, so we're just doing it in 2 steps. And so this totally works. And if that helps you like track what's following here, rock on. If you do this at a job, somebody's gonna make fun of you. Because this dot props means external. And so that and that becomes a little redundant. That's why you see those called the same thing.
I have a question.
Yeah, hit me.
Like when Adam said we cannot do on the lower components, I get a little bit confused. Like, can you explain like?
Sure. So the things that we're doing in this add team, why can't we do that in the lower component? It'd be a lot easier if I just declared this function inside of team form. Why won't that work?
Because we don't have the state
Because we
on
don't
that
have
component.
that state.
Mm, got it.
And the reason why I can't put just all of this stuff into app.js is because I need to get this out of the form state.
Like we need to move out from the form state.
Well, I'm keeping track of what's in the form component. And so if I want to use that, like to make a new team object, I got to do that somewhere. And so that's why we end up doing that as two different submit steps.
Okay.
Some of it needs to know stuff from the form. Some of it needs to know stuff from the state.
Thank you.
More questions?
What about use state?
What was that? Use state? That's a hook.
Oh, okay. You don't need to know that.
Nope. Okay. So here's the magic trick. Now we're going to make it, we're going to try to use this exact same form to update also. That was the original question. How do you use this same like external submit handler thing to do more than one thing? So what we'll do is for each one of these teams, we'll have their team name. And then we'll also have like an instance of this form component that will let us update the name of that team. This might be interesting. So, all right, so there's the team. And I also want to give it an instance of that. The submit handler is actually going to be called update team. But we're going to need to do a couple things differently. So let's see what we have right now. Like something 29. Okay, so now we have little like update forms for each of these. But they all say add team on them. That's our first problem. So what do you think I could do to fix that?
How can we do, instead of a button, have it on enter?
Yeah, we can do something like that. But I like the button. So your stakeholder says, nope, it's got to be a button. What can I do to make this say add team and this say update team?
Can we do ternary?
Don't need to do a ternary.
Okay.
Pass the update function in as into that component.
Oh, you're so close. So we're doing that right now.
Well, pass it in as this dot up whatever the update function is.
All we need to do is change what the button says. How do I make it so that it can say add team here and update here, but it's the same component?
Passing the same prop into a different function? No.
Almost. You're like 80% of the way there. What do we need to pass in as a prop? How about the label of the button? So we could make this something like submit button label, and say that here it's add team, and then we can do that same thing up here and give it a different label. Submit button label equals update team. Okay, does that give anybody any ideas about how I can fix this?
What are you trying to fix?
Well, in this use of the team form component, I pass in a prop called submit button label, and it says one thing. Over here, I'm passing in a prop, and I'm passing in something different. How can I use that to make it so they don't all say add team?
Would you associate those labels with the value of of the input it belongs to, or something like that?
Kinda. So here's the team form component. What do I need to change? I mean, here's the problem right here. What do I change that to?
Oh, this dot props dot submitted button label. And it's just gonna, depending on what it was passed, it's gonna make it that label.
Yep. Ta-da! And now, same component looks different. How flexible. Okay. What else? This next one's kind of tricky. So if I'm updating the team, I probably want it to start with whatever I currently have. Ooh. How would I make this just have Broncos in it already? Because I don't want anything here, but I want that to say Broncos, and that to say Chiefs, and that to say Raiders, that to say Chargers. How do I fix that?
Placeholder.
Yeah.
Okay. But where's that
Like
placeholder going to come from?
spread operator, like
What was that, Alice?
like dot dot dot, like spread operator, right? Whatever is in there before you passing, and then you add a new thing in.
Okay, so I say placeholder. But I need I need all 5 of these to be different. So how do I do that?
Can you do JSX instead of the string or
Yeah.
not? Can you
Can you give each one a class?
We could do classes for it. If I need all 5 of these to be different, the part of a component that changes, that's a good thing to make a prop.
Would the answer be switch?
Nope. Let's give it a default value. So for the new form, it's not going to have one. Over here, though, the default value could be
Yeah, then you just pass that into the placeholder.
So here's the hard part though. So I probably don't want to do the placeholder. I'll show you why. That would work. So I can say placeholder is this dot props dot default value, and we get kind of what we're looking at. So I have nothing there, and I have these placeholders there, except how many forms have you used where you go, oh cool, so I just need to update the, oh no, you're gonna make me start all over again? So we probably want it to be the actual value, but that's where we run into trouble. Because I'm already binding the value of that input to something. Oh no! Now, if I change this to Broncos, we have exactly what I want for one of them, but it's wrong for the other four. Any guesses how we get around this? I'll give you a hint. It's a life cycle hook.
Components we will update.
Well, so we want it before it even goes. So created would work. Component did mount's fine.
Oh.
We say, all right, when the component mounts, I want to call a set state and set name to this dot props dot default value. And now everything's right. So one last piece. The update team function we made, we didn't actually do anything with it. Any ideas for how our update team function could work? It's not totally different than the add team. You gotta do a little bit more work, but not a ton. Because we're still fundamentally trying to do the same thing. We're trying to change the teams. But I can't just spread it like I am there. So what I want to do is this dot state dot teams, and I want to change the team that matches something with a new value.
The ID.
Yeah, so I can find it by ID and change it there. I can actually do this in one step though, with something that you guys learned on about day 3. I have a list of teams. I want to turn it into a slightly different list of teams.
Math.
Map. So you may not have realized this with map, but you don't have to change every single thing on there. So I can say if team ID equals updated team ID, then return updated team, else better syntax than that. What is it?
Ternary.
Ternary. Just turn it. So we can return that. And if it's true, do that. Otherwise, that. We can get rid of those. Exact same thing. We can do it on one line if you want. Although I think that's harder to read. So, cool. Let's see if it works. If I add Broncos, 2 exclamation points. Uh-oh, something didn't work.
Is the parentheses in the return because it's multiple lines?
No, it won't break on a ternary. That's a really good instinct, though. Let's see if the updated team is getting in there correctly to begin with. Okay, that's good. Oh, I think I see why. Because it doesn't have an ID. So let's see. So maybe this form also keeps track of like incrementing IDs. In real life, like you're sending this to a database and you're getting the thing back and it generated an ID for you to add. But we can do the same thing here. So we could do something like that. You could even say something like, if you didn't give me that, then just use whatever I'm currently using. That's fine. And then when we're making our new team, then we should make sure that it has the ID also. And then when we're updating, say, current ID is the team ID. All right, let's see if that works. So Broncos 2 exclamation points. And now we got it. It also reset the form, which I probably didn't want it to do. But that's the idea behind using the same component to do more than one thing. As you all know, you don't need to do that for the Mod 4 Code Challenge, but hit me with some questions.
Can I see your app.js?
A minute.
Oh, sorry.
So there's the state, just keeping track of some teams. I'm turning those teams into a list of list items. And I'm also happen to be using that team form in there. I have an update team method. I have an add team method. And those need to live here because you have to have the things that change state live next to that state. And then in the form for this, I list out all the teams, and then I have a new team form.
Okay.
What else?
What do you call the on-click and on-submit? And so, like, where do you see a list of like where those are?
Oh, there's not that many of them. React synthetic event handlers.
Is it called synthetic because the DOM is like a virtual DOM?
Exactly. Since it's not a real DOM, it doesn't have real events. So that's why they're called synthetic events. I think you can do it with every like normal event. I think if you just put on in front of it. So like there's probably
Okay.
well, let's see. If I go over to app.js and I have one of these and I have like an on hover. And I don't know if you picked up on this, but you can just do random JavaScript in these things. It does need a function though, so we can say console.log, I'm hovering. Okay, so if I hover over the form, do I get anything? Huh, oh. Which events have JSX syntax? On click on submit. Yeah, I've never actually seen a list of them. Maybe it's here. So there, okay, here we go. So we've got on focus. So, but if I do on focus, huh? Maybe you have to do those on real elements. If I do that same thing over here. In fact, I'm almost positive that's what it is. Oops, and you can't focus a submit button. Alright, so now I'm focused. There we go. I'll bet on hover works for that too. Maybe? No, it still doesn't. Alright, so there it's in the docs under events. On focus, on blur, DOM event target, on change, on input, on invalid. Here's all the ones you got. On select, on touch, on scroll. But yeah, you have to do those on actual events. You can't do them on components, which I think is stupid, but that's a React limitation. Cool. I got time for one more.
Can I see your form? Please?
Yep. So the form is keeping track of what ID I'm going to send up. I guess it probably would have made more sense to keep track of the ID over here. So like, we could do something like object.assign updated team, and then give it an ID there. Like that would have worked, but we are keeping track of these things. Whenever the component loads up, we check to see if we have a default value and ID passed in. If we do, we set the state to that. We can update the form value. That's part of the captured form, or sorry, controlled form. We can handle the submit, prevent default, make the new team, all the things that this form is for. without saying what the app is supposed to do with any of that. All we do is call some function that we got given and give it the new team that the form generated. That's all this form knows. And then this form calls its internal submit handler there. It is bound to the value of state, and it knows how to update its own state. And then we also have a dynamic name for this label. That's just some string that we're passing in. Cool.
And can I ask you a question? It might be for another lesson, but
Okay.
it's like it's on fetch and doing a delete.
Mm-hmm.
Say you're deleting something from a collection, and that collection is in the state,
Mm-hmm.
and you're obviously going to optimistically render that delete
Mm-hmm.
so that item's being removed.
Sure.
But is there a way to chain from that fetch so that it's also like you don't have to refresh? It's just it knows that it's deleted.
Absolutely. We had a delete team. It's probably taking in something like an ID. And so if you want to do it optimistically, then we can do this dot set state. And then the magic trick there is that teams is this dot state dot teams dot filter, and you're filtering out for whatever team doesn't have the ID that you passed in. Told you all this map filter reduce stuff is going to come in handy. And then you do your fetch to wherever and actually delete.
Okay, so yeah, I think, and then there's no like dot then to that. It's just delete. There's no like.
Wouldn't have to, but let's say you wanted to pessimistically render that.
Right.
Okay. So then you take the response you get back. You say if response dot okay.
Okay.
And now it won't do it until that response comes back.
Okay, thank you.
Awesome. Cool. You guys have a very short survey that the company would like you to do about working remotely. And elsewise, I'll see you guys this afternoon. I'll get this video up soon too if you want to review any of it. Oops, there's stuff in the chat. Let's see. Yes, I am recording. You say... Okay, and everybody asked everything else. All right, cheers.